All right. Hello and welcome everyone to this session on non-WMS for production. I am here today with our two presenters, Chris Thompson and Mariah Holcomb. We're going to give the other attendees just another minute to arrive, but in that time, please keep in mind that we will be keeping an eye on the chat and Q&A features. So if you have any questions that come up during the session, please don't hesitate to submit them. We love to address those kind of things live and in the moment. All right. Again, we're just going to give it about another 30 seconds for the rest of our attendees to arrive. All right. I think we've got everybody here. Let's get this party started. Again, we've got Mariah Holcomb and Chris Thompson here for non-WMS for producers. Take it away, guys.
Hey everybody, as Lori said, I'm Mariah Holcomb. I am a product manager here at Encompass. I oversee WMS, or our warehouse management system. That encompasses a lot of inventory management from the time inventory comes into a warehouse to the time it's leaving, whether that is to be sent to a distributor shipping out from a producer or going all the way to a retail location from a distributor. So excited to talk through some of these concepts today. I will note on the first title card we saw, non-WMS for producers. This is a presentation that's very focused on a new inventory management option we have on the production side specifically. So if you're a distributor here, it might be some good information, but this will be focused on production. And then within that, if you are an OBR customer right now, this will be focused on production within OCloud on Encompass. So potentially a great option to convert to. There would be a little bit more work incoming from OBR for something like that, but a lot of good information here on the OCloud side of things.
Perfect. And I am Chris Thompson. I'm on the onboarding team as an implementation consultant, working to bring new customers onto our software and also specializing in working through special projects and upgrades that you may be going through as an existing customer. Excited to talk about non-WMS for producers today. So our agenda today, we're going to be covering production inventory management and where we've come from and what that looks like. We'll touch on the differences between WMS and non-WMS and what non-WMS for producers looks like and where we're going. From there, we'll hop into some action items and how to prepare if you decide to go through the non-WMS conversion and what steps that you can take to best align yourself for that conversion. And then we'll hit on some resources and next steps and open it up for Q&A at the end.
Thanks, Chris. So when we look at production inventory management right now in our current environment, what does that really mean? For a producer, there is a very specific and important concept in inventory management, batch tracking. So within Encompass, historically, batch tracking has come from the WMS tier of inventory management specifically. So when we talk about WMS, we're really thinking a lot about batch tracking, but within that, there's some key concepts that this style provides. One product can live in many locations at one time. So that means you might have, some hops raw material that's living in a dry storage area of your warehouse. We can keep track of that number separately from a more on-floor, ready to pick for materials gathering ahead of a production run. That might be a separate area of your warehouse. And those two areas can be separate of each other, hold separate numbers of that same hops raw material, and you can understand those in the system separately. Because of this, inventory counts are also independent of one another. So you can tell the system that there's 5 bags of hops in your dry storage and 10 in the material staging area. That kind of tracking and that separate concept of inventory counting does require a lot more communication and more consistent, constant communication with the system as well. So every time something moves, if we're moving from dry storage to material staging, you got to tell the system every time that shift happens. And along with that, you have to make sure that communication happens in real time. Because there's so many different areas in a warehouse where you might be tracking these numbers, if you let movements occur and then don't tell the system until later, it's more likely that other movement has occurred in between that could impact those inventory numbers as well. So the more real time you can communicate with the system, that's a big key concept in WMS. What that means on the flip side is that server-side counting and a lot of movement happening on a desktop is not really something that we support or focus on in a WMS environment because it's so much more important to be standing in front of that inventory and communicating to the system as those moves and counts occur. Finally, we've got bin lots, which is that concept of batch tracking in the Encompass system. So a bin lot basically just means a specific date or a specific batch of product all living in one bin. So you might have multiple batches floating around your warehouse at the same time or multiple expiration dates. Bin lots or batch tracking allows you to keep track of all of those unique values all in the same place, keep them separate from each other for more granular tracking that helps you in recipe management, in making sure that if there's recalls, you know what to call back. Bin lots is really about keeping an eye on that next level down of data, not just the inventory number, but that specific batch that's within there. So previously, that was reserved only for the WMS tier, but now moving into production inventory management on the non-WMS side, we have opened up that kind of tracking for producers. So in a non-WMS environment, everything gets a lot more simplified and a bit more streamlined as far as that kind of data entry goes. In non-WMS, a product can only live in a single bin in the system. So before we talked about hops maybe living in a dry storage area and a material staging area, that kind of concept doesn't really exist in a non-WMS environment. While physically, those might still be living in different areas of your warehouse, in the system, that would be represented by only the total number of inventory you have. So again, if we think back to 5 bags of hops living in dry storage and 10 being in material staging, what we would understand in the Encompass system is a total of 15 hops that you have just in your warehouse period. So that more simplified view of inventory management does also simplify inventory counting. So instead of having to enter those physical numbers separately, 5 and 10, you would also communicate a total to the system when you're counting. Our counting methods that we'll see more of as we go through this presentation do allow for some math to be done, so you can still work with separate numbers, but at the end of the day, you'll just communicate everything that's in your warehouse all at once. Continuing with that simplified communication, movement only needs to be communicated to the system when entering or exiting. And what I mean by that is tell the system when you are receiving a new shipment of raw materials or anything like that coming into the warehouse for the first time. And then we also tell the system when inventory is officially leaving. So if it's going out on a shipment, if we are writing off some samples or something that went out of code, those kinds of communications are maintained, but any physical movement inside the building, you don't have to communicate. So moving something from dry storage to material staging, don't need to tell the system about those things. Because of that lack of internal communication that's needed. That does mean that delayed data entry is also supported. So it's not as important to tell the system in real time what's happening, because the kinds of numbers and the kind of movement you're communicating is more bookended in the process. Circling back to bin lots, specifically for producers, like I said, we have opened that up to the non-WMS tier. And that's where things really get exciting, and being able to convert to this non-WMS system is because you can maintain your batch tracking and that granular level of inventory, even in a non-WMS environment. So we still have our inventory total. That's the main concept we're thinking about in non-WMS. But within that total, we can still understand that there's 5 of batch A and 3 of batch B. So now that we sort of understand the differences between WMS and non-WMS, you might be starting to consider what's really right for me. I've been using WMS for a while now. Maybe there's some ways I'd prefer for it to be simpler, but maybe there's also some ways that it's helpful to me. So how do you know which one is right? Non-WMS is a really great option for warehouses where there's not any kind of dedicated staff specifically for inventory management. So we see in the production space that oftentimes a lot of our team members are wearing many different hats. So someone who's a production manager might also keep track of inventory. They might also help do receiving of raw materials. So if you have a team or a small team, maybe it's just one person who's doing a lot of role switching based on the day and what needs to be done, non-WMS is a great option because it's more simple. Also, if you maybe do have a larger staff, but they're not as accustomed, or you're not looking to step into processes that are really rigorous on regular communication with the system about inventory changes, or you're not ready to take on that kind of communication, non-WMS is a great option. And along with that, if you have a smaller warehouse footprint or not as complex of a storage system, so inventory is all stored in relatively the same area with not a lot of distance between any separation that there might be, non-WMS is going to be great because it's really structured around that kind of simple storage system. On the flip side of that, WMS is really great to have when you have a higher SKU count. So we see that less on the production side, but if you're getting into maybe co-packing or managing a lot of different, test products or things like that, where you might have a lot of different raw materials and also a lot of different finished goods, WMS is great to help keep track of that high number because it offers that granularity to keep visibility on everything. Also, if you have dedicated inventory staff, so looking back at team size and maybe having someone who is specifically dedicated to inventory management, if you have that kind of resource, then WMS is really lends itself well to someone who can focus on it as their main job. So bring it back to non-WMS. If that last slide really resonated with you and it sounds like non-WMS might be right for you, let's talk a little bit more about some of the key features that come along with non-WMS for producers specifically. So we know in a WMS environment, you can't enter counts on the server. So that's benefit number one of non-WMS. You get the ability to enter counts on the server on a desktop computer, where you can enter all of your counts on one page, or even print a product list to take counts on paper and then enter that later into the system after physically reviewing. You also get streamlined inventory adjustments. So in the WMS side, you have to break out your adjustments to each bin you might be working with, which means that general loss would be written off separate from breakage, would be written off separate from out of code, would be written off separate from lab samples. In a non-WMS environment, that's all very streamlined. All of the counts that you're reconciling, you get to choose where those adjustments fall, all within the same page. So we'll see that demonstrated live in just a little bit, but that process of actually clearing inventory out of your system is much more simplified. There's also no need to communicate every time inventory moves, as we talked about before. So with a single inventory, total inventory number for a product, inventory movements internally don't need to be communicated. So you don't have to worry about constantly keeping up with what's happening, so long as you're maintaining accurate levels of total inventory. And then finally, streamlined receiving. So we haven't talked about it receiving a ton yet, but because in a non-WMS environment, product can only live in one bin, that means that during the receiving process, there isn't additional steps to take on determining where inventory should go. When you receive a purchase, it's just going to immediately contribute to the on-floor total for your product, and you don't have to worry about telling the system, right now this is in the receiving bin and I need to move it over to storage and also pick. Those are all steps that are cut out of the process. So with that, we will jump into some demos now. And you might be wondering, I'm interested in non-WMS. I want to know what it takes to actually convert. So we will look at some steps on that side and some ways you can prepare as we get a little bit later in this webinar. But first, we want to continue to help you know if non-WMS is right for you by looking a little bit closer at some of the tools that you would use in a non-WMS environment.
Perfect. So as Mariah noted, one of the benefits of switching to a non-WMS environment for production customers is the ability to create bin count tasks and count inventory on the server side. So what we're looking at right now is a screenshot of what that would potentially look like for you if you did convert. I have generated a bin count task for a couple of different products here. We see that we have product information, the bin that I'm supposed to be picking, and some inventory numbers. And then below that, we also display the batches or bin lot information with individual inventory counts for those. And we also display date information. So what does this look like on a demo? So let me hop over to our site here. I've landed on the warehouse home dashboard. To begin counting on the server side or entering in bin count tasks, you can go and navigate to the bin count tasks table from the warehouse home dashboard. You can also type in bin count tasks into your search bar and navigate over to this particular table. Minimize that. To begin counting on the server side, simply click Add Bin Count Tasks. And from here, we have the ability to filter down the products that we're going to be counting or that we want to count. So what's neat about this is that I can filter by brand or product type. And thinking about this, if you do convert over to non-WMS as a production customer, this might be a way that you want to start thinking about how to set up cycle counts. So perhaps on the first week of the month, we want to count finished good package or raw materials hops. So we support that functionality by filtering to different product types. Or if you know exactly which products you want to count, you can enter in those product names or product IDs. So for example, I want to count a couple of different products here. I've selected my two products. If I wanted to from here, I can assign this bin count task to a member of my team, and then they can go and count those on the handheld. But for this example, let's go ahead and add this bin count task and see what this looks like server-side counting. After I've created the bin count task for the products that I want to count, it takes me back to the individual record that I've created. We have some information here. We see the assigned status. It's been assigned to myself, and we've noted which location that we're going to be counting. If I click the plus sign and expand the subtable, I can see that I have my bin counts that I've selected, which indicates which products I want to be counting. On here, I have some inventory information that what the system currently thinks I have. Now I have the option to have somebody go count this for me, bring back a spreadsheet and enter those in. To enter in those counts, simply click on the hyperlink for enter counts and it'll take you into our counting dashboard here. Again, we have product information, the bin that we're counting, our inventory levels, our inventory count, which has been grayed out, and some errors. So to enter in our inventory counts, we can expand the plus sign to then begin counting the particular batches that we have associated with this product in our system. For this example, I'm going to go ahead and count for our WM6696. We'll go ahead and say, instead of 5, I actually have 125 of this batch. And for the winter spice porter, I'll go ahead and enter 110 on one batch, and then 15 on a secondary batch. If we scroll back up to the top and hit save, this is going to complete the bin count task that I have designated. I can view that bin count task, review the counts that I've entered, and see what I have for adjustment. I can then begin reconciling. So to reconcile the bin count task is going to be a little bit different than reconciling inventory in a WMS environment. If we click reconcile, this gives us the option to then determine how we want to adjust for these errors. So I have a couple of different options along the top here, and these are going to be reasons that are tied to specific adjustment customers, and we can take a look at those in a minute. I can expand this and use individual reasons, as Mariah was mentioning, to direct those losses or breakage or out of code, whatever the case may be, based on the batch that I've been counting. You also have the ability, if I know that everything that I have counted and the errors that I'm seeing are a result of the product not being there, you also have the ability to click the reason as the column header and autofill down and confirm that reason or that adjustment customer. Simply click the column header, confirm it, and then hit save. And this is reconciled that particular errors that we've seen. From here, we jump into where do we want to date the adjustment invoice and load sheet. As a default, it's going to set you to today's date. We can throw in our route that we want this to populate onto. And then for tracking purposes on the invoice, you can enter in a memo. So if we were doing cycle counts, perhaps this could be November finished good counts. Once I've confirmed the date that I want this to impact the GL, click the Generate Inventory Adjustment Invoice. And we have reconciled and confirmed the count that we've just went through. We've written off our discrepancies to our inventory adjustment customer. What's neat about this is that the reasons that we see are predicated based off of return rules. So if we hop over to the return rules table and we look at our non-WMS location, we can see the reasons over here that populated within the bin count task and the adjustment customers that are associated with those. Why this is important is because on the adjustment customers is where our TTB tax code information lives and how we want this to reflect on the TTB reporting. Here we can see our inventory adjustment customer has a TTB tax code of overage or shortage. So I would expect those losses to reflect within that column on the TTB tax code or tax report. Jump back over here. So what does handheld counting look like in a non-WMS environment? And I'll pass this over to you, Mariah. You are muted.
Thank you. So we just saw a great demonstration of server-side counting, which is a great benefit of non-WMS for producers. But you might be wondering, I actually really like counting on the handheld. I like being able to stand in front of my inventory and type those numbers in immediately. Do I still have the ability to do that? The answer is yes. So mobile counting option is still available. It uses the same bin count task structure that we just saw Chris demonstrate on the desktop. All product inventory should be added together. So we'll see a demonstration of that math here in just a moment. And you have access to those same bin lot or batch tracking data displayed in the product detail view as well. So even though our first screenshot here looks a little bit simple, just like a list of each product to enter a total, when you hop into an individual product, you can still see those separate batches. So I will share my screen here now and we'll take a look at a mobile view. All right, so we are in the warehouse tool of Encompass Mobile and I have my non-WMS location selected. So now, once you're in a non-WMS environment on a handheld, you'll notice that the view here looks just a little bit different in the inventory count section. So you'll no longer have an option that just says inventory count or access to directed inventory counting, because those things are replaced by non-WMS inventory count here. So we'll hop into this tool. And what I'll see by default is that I have an option to add a bin count task. Now, with that task that Chris just made on the server, if he had decided to assign that work to me instead of entering those counts himself on the desktop, we would actually see that task here. If there isn't anything listed, then you can always go ahead and add one yourself. So I'll just tap on Add Bin Count Task. And then the view that we get here is the exact same set of filters that you see when creating a bin count task from the server as well. So if we are counting our raw materials today, we could select a product type for that. For this demonstration, I'm going to go ahead and just select a couple of products for us here. All right. So we'll add this bin count task now. And this is the view of my list of assigned work. So again, if Chris had assigned a task to me, this is what the view would look like if I hopped into this tool for the first time on the handheld. This is also what we're seeing now is the task that I just created. So we'll tap into this. And now we can see my two products that I'm expected to count are Follow Logger and the Turkey Trot Triple. So if I didn't need to do any more granular tracking, I could go ahead and just type in the quantities on this page here. And we can see in the red text, that is the quantity that the system is expecting there to be right now. So I should have 104 of the logger and 117 of the triple. We can verify that with some counting here, but what I'll note is that those red numbers don't have to be displayed. So if you are working on locking down a more strict inventory management process, you do have the ability to hide those expected quantities. We have a system setting for blind counting where you can choose to turn that off. And if that is turned off, then you just simply won't see that red text on this screen. But let's hop into our first product here, our logger. And in this product detail screen is where we see a little bit more of a familiar view. So if you're used to WMS counting, the pallets, layers, cases, quantity breakdown will be very familiar, that upper section. The count by bin lot section might be pretty familiar as well. So we don't lose access to that in a non-WMS site. I can scroll through this list and see all of the various different batches of this product and the different dates that they have separated out here. So if I wanted to count by my individual bin lots, I can do that. For this one, I'll go ahead and say that I see, 100 of this first batch, 2 of this second batch, and 1 of the third one listed here. So as I enter those individual quantities, What we'll see is that the system does do the math for me up at the top, so I have 103 there. If I only knew a total, then I could type in 103 up here at the top and then toggle my distribute total by FIFO option on if I'm not able to sort of see all the batches I have. And then based on the system's current understanding of that inventory, it will line up with your expected batch counts. So a couple of different useful ways that you can still interact with inventory on the handheld, though the overall way that we're tracking inventory might be a little bit more simple. So for this one, I'll go ahead and hit my check mark up in the top right corner to complete that count. And if that was where I was going to end my inventory counting, then what I just did is send my count information to the server. We did only count one of those products though, so I can always hop back in here, tap on this one as well, and enter my total. So here's a demonstration where we can see I've only entered my total quantity up at the top. If I do still want to distribute that number by the expected batches that we currently have in the system, I can toggle that on. And we can see that the system has gone ahead and filled in all of those numbers for me as we would expect them to be. So with that, I'll complete that count. That task, as far as my work is concerned, has been completed. It does still need to be reconciled on the server side, which we saw from Chris in the back half of his demonstration. So we won't go through that again, but once you've hit that check mark, that's how we know that information is back in the system. One important concept with using counting on the handheld, especially in a non-WMS environment, is that you actually can do counting while not connected to the internet. So if you don't have a great Wi-Fi connection or any sort of cell data in your warehouse, that's totally fine. You do need to make sure that you at least start your count or create your task in an area that has a data connection, and you need to end it in that same area. So at the end of the counting process, just make sure you're somewhere that can be connected so that you're able to send that information back to the system. So with that, we've gotten a great look at our server side and handheld side inventory management processes and the way that's simplified for non-WMS. So now you might be wondering, okay, this process is really feeling right for me. I think I do want to switch. So how can I start getting ready for that? One of the first things that will happen when you convert from a WMS environment to a non-WMS environment is that all of your inventory will consolidate. So what that means is all of those various different dry storage and samples lab and receiving, all of those kinds of places, material staging, those separate numbers in a WMS system will all come together and be added together once you convert to non-WMS. All of those numbers will live in the same place. So to prepare for that conversion, what you can do is just monitor your WMS inventory, get a good understanding of where everything is living, and then go from there. So we'll look at one of our raw materials products here, some ascorbic acid. And we can see in this example that this raw material is living in brewing picks, dry storage, lab samples. We also have some inventory in the adjustment bin. So all of these separate numbers would be added up together in going to non-WMS. So in seeing these numbers, that's really all you need to do is just understand where everything's living. The more accurate you can make sure that your inventory is before converting, the easier it's going to be to understand on the other side of the conversion. But you don't have to take any action from here. If you wanted to get ahead of the curve and consolidate everything ahead of time, you can always use the move function to move inventory altogether, though that's not required. In converting to non-WMS from a WMS environment, as a part of the process, the system will actually automatically consolidate things for you. So it's important to be comfortable with your inventory and understand what's going on, but you don't have to do that moving manually. One other process you should do, though, ahead of time is make sure that anything that should be written off is done in advance. And for that, we'll take a look at that on the server side.
Perfect. Let me pull up my screen. Okay, so doing a write-off in a WMS environment, hopefully this should look pretty familiar. What we're looking at right now is the warehouse inventory bins report, and we are filtering to our adjustment bin. From here, we have the ability to select products and generate our write-off and filter out which particular adjustment bin we want to look at. So if we jump back over to our test environment, again, I'm on the warehouse home dashboard. I can get to the inventory bins report by clicking this hyperlink underneath the reports table, or I can also search for the warehouse inventory bins report in my search bar. Clicking on our link, it takes us over to the bins report. Looking at this, we have some information over here. We can bring in additional columns aside from just the start and inventory and product name. One that I like to bring in when I'm thinking about doing a write-off would be the approximate value, which gives me an idea of what is it and how much cost am I writing off if I do generate this inventory adjustment. And then moving across on the right-hand side of our screen is just filtering options. So we have the ability to look at cases if we want to view what we're writing off in cases or barrels. We can set some start and end dates if we're looking for investigative purposes for inventory. And then just some group by and order by filters. But down here, if we're getting ready to make that conversion and cleaning up our adjustment bin, we can filter to the bin zone type of adjustment, or we can filter to a specific bin zone of adjustment or bin, if that is the case. From here, we can set our location information if we wanted to, or we can simply hit create report. And what this is going to do is it's going to return everything that we have within our adjustment bin. And from here, we can generate our inventory write-off by clicking our inventory write-off button and then selecting the products that we would like to clear out of our adjustment bin. Once I've grabbed the products that I'm looking to write off, we can follow the same steps of generating that inventory write-off and then following the prompts to select our route in our adjustment customer. Let's jump back over here. So we've gone through, we've moved our products, and we've written off our adjustment bin, and we're looking to prepare for that non-WMS conversion. As Mariah noted, some of the steps that you can take if you're actively wanting to pursue this non-WMS conversion is review your inventory across your bins. What that means is we can review where our products are at, where they're stored, and see if there are multiple bins and begin that cleanup process. So go through, clear out your adjustment bin, generate that inventory adjustment. Also review the receiving bin and backstock to see if there is any system inventory that exists that's not within our expected pick locations. And we're doing that to prevent inventory mismanagement. From there, we also want to review the bins to understand how this inventory is going to consolidate once turning off our WMS. And as Mariah had noted, when we do make that conversion and we do turn off WMS, everything is going to roll up into that pick bin. There is some exceptions to this. The equipment bins are the exception to this rule. So the inventory that is within your equipment bin will still hold within that piece of equipment and will not be wrapped up into your pickable pick location. And then thinking about inventory adjustments and write-offs. So we want to go through and conduct our inventory counts after we've made those moves and then do that write-off process. This just helps ensure that your inventory is accurate upon that making that conversion. And then we also want to review our inventory adjustments and make sure that those are complete before our conversion process. So converting to non-WMS with Encompass, what does this look like? A couple of key points here that we want to point out is, going through and things that you can do would be checking your products and, like I said, making sure that our products aren't existing in multiple bins. Again, those receiving bins, adjustment bins, and backstock. Perform that inventory count. So sure up your inventory and write off your adjustment bin. From there, when you're working with Encompass, somebody at Encompass can go through, and after you perform these first two checks, we can then turn off the WMS on the locations table to make that a non-WMS location for you. From there, we're going to want to make sure that all of our load sheets have been set to perpetual inventory. That just ensures that we're making sure we're doing our count in and reconciling inventory correctly when we generate load sheets and invoices. We also want to then review our pick bin zone and ensure that our pick bin zone has bin lots turned on or is at least set to optional for scanning. And we also want to review our default bins. We want to make sure that we have removed the receiving bin and that is not set, because we don't want product as we're receiving it into our warehouse to mistakenly end up in our receiving bin and not defaulting to our pick bin as expected. Once we've gone through there, somebody at Encompass can run a series of scheduled tasks to shore up your non-WMS location. And from there, we can begin configuring our return rules to make sure that they align with the adjustment customers and the TTB tax codes that we're expecting for TTB reporting.
So pretty involved process, a couple of things that you can do on your side alone, and some things that will take some Encompass help. But before you dive into that process, just a reminder of some of the key simplifications that are being made, along with the biggest benefits and gained features that you get from non-WMS. So removing the receiving bin and any other kinds of holding bins like QC, samples, breakage, that all converts to needing to be adjusted instead, or generally simplifying to be on-floor inventory. No directed inventory or directed replenishment because we're converting to bin count tasks. Still a great level of control there, but less system guidance because we've simplified where that inventory is living. And then no truck return for non-good product. Basically, that means that on the truck return side, everything's quite simple. If you're going to take inventory back into the system, it's going to be good. And if it is something like breakage or loss, something that was for samples or things like that, that will become an immediate adjustment as well. So some good simplification and streamlining of processes. You also receive server-side counting and generally simplified inventory management, so a great benefit for smaller teams. Optional delayed data entry, which in a busy production environment can definitely be a plus. And then that streamlined receiving that Chris talked about earlier. So what do you do now? You know that non-WMS is right for you. Where do we go from here? It's always good to be as educated as possible as you go through this process. So we have a couple of links on this slide that you'll be able to access following this webinar. A great one-pager that lays out all of the information we've shared in this presentation, along with a couple of help resources for non-WMS bin count tasks like Chris and I walked you through today, along with clearing the adjustment bin for a WMS write-off so that you can get ready for that non-WMS conversion. So review that documentation as needed. Make sure you're confident about converting to non-WMS, and Encompass can always help you decide if you're still not sure. Once you know that this is the right move for you, take some of those preparation steps that we walked through in slide 12 of this presentation and reach out to Encompass support to get that conversation started in the conversion process. Thanks everybody for attending today, and please let us know if you have any questions.
Thank you.
All right. We do have a question that came through the chat. Are there any differences in how inventory is assigned and consumed when processing production orders in a non-WMS environment versus WMS?
That's a great question. So as far as how we tie into production processing, a lot of that is looking at the bin lot level of data. So we care a lot about the batches that you're using in production, but the bins that it comes from aren't necessarily as important when you're just pulling that material in. So the impact in using ingredients for production does not change. As Chris noted as well, equipment bins are excluded from the non-WMS consolidation, which means that you can still use equipment just fine throughout the production process.
Okay,
So no big changes.
great. I don't see anything else that has come through the chat. So while if there's anybody who's currently typing, I'm just gonna sort of start to get into my closing spiel, and hopefully you get any last questions in there as soon as you can. I want to start by thanking Chris and Mariah for offering us this session today. We hope it was really helpful for all of the attendees. It will be posted on our recording archive, so you'll be able to find this recording there if you want to go back to any specific part of it and take a look for the sake of that comparison and making the determination if this is the right choice for you to move to. So be on the lookout for that coming to our recording archive soon. We will also post it with the links that Mariah talked about to the help resources. So they'll all sort of be attached there and you'll be able to see it. We will be posting a survey at the end of this session. We are actively planning right now for the 2025 spring season of what these sessions can look like. So if you have any suggestions for a topic or ideas for improvements that we can make, please don't hesitate to submit them. There'll be that option in the survey. We'd love to hear back from you. All right. I don't see anything else that came through, so I think we're going to go ahead and close it down. Thanks everybody for attending, and we'll see you in the next round, okay?
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.